Tonight, we're going to continue our Bible study on Copernicus and the Jews by author Daniel Gruber. Good evening. My name is Laurie Cardozo Moore, and I'm the president of PJTN. Welcome to PJTN Online. If you're not familiar with proclaiming justice to the nations, our mission is to educate Christians about their biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and defend the state of Israel against the rise of anti-Semitism. We accomplish that mission by producing award-winning documentary films and programs, and we distribute them through our 21 global media partners in 200 nations, reaching 2.6 billion viewers. And of course, we designed this program, PJTN Online, with you in mind. Since we hear from so many of you throughout the week who tune into our Focus on Israel show on Daystar and God TV and our other media outlets, we get emails constantly asking more questions. So this is our opportunity every week. It's an engagement platform for you and for PJTN to engage, for us to have a conversation about what our biblical role is as Christians to stand with our Jewish brethren and defend the state of Israel. As I said, our mission is to educate and activate. So if you have any comments, you have any questions, you can always send us a question or a comment on Facebook here right now tonight, or you can email me at comments@pjtn.org. Since our mission is to educate and activate Christians, Jews, and all people of conscience to stand against anti-Semitism, this engagement platform will give you the tools and the information and the research to be able to share this information with your family and friends. We would also encourage you to become a PJTN Watchman. And quite simply, all you have to do is go to the website at pjtn.org and sign up. With a small, modest contribution every month, you can help us keep programs like this on the air. Also, as a watchman on the wall, we count on you to contact us and let us know when you see anti-Semitic incidents in your community. If you see or hear something, email me or send us a message on Facebook and let us help you to take a stand against that threat in your community. Now for the news this week. And every week we talk about some of the highlights, some of the news features of the week. And of course, many of you are tuned in to the news and know what's going on with the Congresswoman from Minnesota, Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar has received some feedback this week from Congress, members of the Democrats and Republicans, and the president as well as PJTN, condemning her recent comments that were considered anti-Semitic. Of course, Ilhan Omar was blaming the Jews, or blaming AIPAC, because it's a Jewish organization, for making contributions to congressmen that were affecting our relationship with Israel. And she saw that as a threat. Of course, we all know that there are different organizations that take contributions from different lobbying groups. That's been going on for a long time. But unfortunately, with regards to Ilhan Omar, my question is who is funding her campaign? Because she seems to be tied to groups like CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and other organizations who have known ties to terrorist groups. In fact, Ilhan is going to be speaking next week at a fundraising event for Islamic Relief USA. Islamic Relief is tied to the Muslim Brotherhood group. They've also been labeled a terrorist group by other Muslim nations. And so we have a sitting congresswoman now who is going to go and speak to raise money for Islamic Relief USA. And the question is, should we be concerned that that money that a U.S. official is going to speak at a fundraising event is going to go to fund terrorism against the United States, against our allies Israel, or any of our allies around the world? This question begs to be asked, and nobody is asking this question. I've read countless articles that have been published. Everything is about her anti-Semitic quote. Yes, we are deeply disturbed, and she should not be serving, she should definitely not be serving on the Foreign Relations Committee. And she certainly should not be a member of Congress, because not only is she expressing values, anti-Semitic values that we do not agree with, because those values that she incites, or that the statements that she is continuing to put out, incites violence against our Jewish community. That's why we see a rise of anti-Semitism in the United States, because we have people, individuals like Omar and Talib in Michigan and others who are supporting the anti-Semitic boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, or BDS. And of course, we see BDS is the major tool right now to incite the violence against the Jewish community and against Israel. So this woman has no business being in Congress. She should immediately be forced to resign, and an investigation, an FBI investigation, should be launched against her to determine her ties to known terrorist groups like CARE. And of course, if you've tuned into this program, you know that we expose CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and their affiliation or association with our textbooks and instructional materials that we are using. They are publishing content for our children in our public school system. And for those of you who remember, back in 1987, CARE was listed as an unindicted co-conspirator in the largest terrorist fundraising operation in the history of the United States of America. But somehow, under the Obama administration, CARE has been able to wiggle their way into our government, into the highest offices of our government, and of course, their affiliation with organizations or individuals like Omar, like Talib. So we, as members of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, we are not just calling for her to be censured. We're not just calling for her to be removed from the Foreign Relations Committee. We are calling for her to step down as a congresswoman. She and her association with Muslim brother terrorist groups is a threat to our national security in the United States of America and that of our allies. So I hope that you'll continue to watch. We are going to be putting a press release out today. Again, if you're not on our mailing list, I encourage you to stay involved and stay informed about what's going on. Please go to pjtn.org and sign up to get on our email list, so you'll get our press releases and announcements of events that are going on, as well as our calls to action. This is the time when we need you to contact your congressman or congresswoman and ask them to please demand that Omar be removed from Congress. She is not American born. She was born in Somalia. She grew up in Somalia. She did not grow up in the United States of America. She moved into Minnesota with all the other immigrants that were put there. And of course, she is espousing this hatred toward the Jewish people and her anti-Semitism and her support of terrorist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, that may be fine in Somalia, but it doesn't go over here in the United States of America. We are a civilized country, and we won't tolerate anti-Semitism, and we won't support groups who support terrorists. So moving on to the next article of the week is the anti-Semitism that we are watching, the anti-Israel bias in public schools, and of course it being an American problem. And again, for those of you who have been with PJTN for a long time, you know that we have been at the forefront of exposing the anti-Semitic, anti-American, anti-Judeo-Christian, anti-Israel, anti-West, and pro-Islamic content that is in direct violation of our U.S. and state constitutions, because it favors the religion of Islam over all other religions. And many parents have been outraged by the content that their children are being forced to learn. And of course, we're going to talk about Governor DeSantis in Florida in just a minute. But we have heard from parents all over the country since 2012 who have reviewed their children's textbooks, their instructional materials, and are finding similar content as to what we found here in Tennessee, as to what we're finding in Ohio, in Texas, in Florida and many other states across the United States of America. This is deeply troubling because we are watching our children being indoctrinated with propaganda. Our children are not growing up to be supportive of America. They don't grow up with any real knowledge of civics. And one of the most important things about public education is that we're educating our children to make sure that their civics, that they understand civics, that they understand our form of government, that they understand their role and their duty when they become adults as citizens of America to protect our constitutional republic. And unfortunately, because of Common Core, because of the propaganda in the textbooks published by Pearson, and of course, Pearson Publishers' shareholders include the governments of Qatar, of Libya, of Turkey, and of Saudi Arabia. These are the shareholders that govern the affairs of Pearson Publishing. Pearson Publishing, or Pearson Education, is a British-based textbook publishing company. They are not U.S.-based. We have got to remove their curriculum. We need to remove Common Core. We need to remove their textbooks from America's schools because they are teaching our children to be anti-American, anti-capitalism, which is what made this country great. Instead, we have young people who are growing up to support socialism. What they don't understand, first and foremost, is look at what's happening in Venezuela. That's a great indication of what happens when a government becomes socialist. Now, the United States of America is already moving in that direction. We've adopted health care, which is a socialist program. Of course, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. Now, I'm not going to get into a debate about whether Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security should be eliminated. We've had that for a long time, but the health care has posed a huge problem in our country, and no longer can people obtain reasonably priced health care for their families because it is out of control expensive. And of course, we were forced into a single payer system, and it is up to our elected officials, it's up to the President of the United States to reverse that course, because there is no country where socialism has worked. We hear Bernie Sanders saying, well, I don't agree with the socialism of Venezuela. Well, he supports Sweden. All of these countries are in various levels at various places within adopting socialism. We cannot go down that route. We have to have a free society. We have to continue to strengthen our capitalist society in order to maintain the freedoms that we enjoy. Because once socialism comes in and the government starts to determine what you get and what you don't get, what rights you have and what rights you don't have, once you head down that slippery slope, it takes what's happening in Venezuela to reverse the course. So it's very dangerous. But the reason, again, why this is happening is because of the textbooks, because of the curriculum, and even our teachers that are graduating from these universities that have teaching schools are also being educated with the same propaganda. So when a parent like myself, who has gone through the education system and who has come out as a strong advocate for the United States of America and our values and our freedoms, now those teachers look at me as if there's something wrong with me, that I'm just old-fashioned. No, I was educated in a correct manner, just like many of you were as well. And we turned out to be patriots. We believe in our country, we fight for our country, and of course our government is a government by the people. We the people, we determine the course of where we're going. But unfortunately our children that are going through the school system, not so much. They haven't been educated about why America is worth fighting for, about why men and women went off to war throughout our history to give their lives and spill their blood, not just in the U.S. soil, but in foreign lands, in the soil of other countries, because we were defending freedom. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's up to us to determine the future of our government, as well as how our government schools are going to educate our children. Moving on, the next article, for those of you who are already on PJTN's mailing list, we sent out a press release earlier this week commending Governor Ron DeSantis for his public announcement of repealing Common Core. I've got a video I want to show you. Let's take a look at this clip, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit more about Governor DeSantis and his efforts in the state of Florida.
So one of the things that we would constantly hear about on the campaign trail is a frustration with a lot of parents in particular with this idea of Common Core and some of the testing and some of the things that go into that. And it's called Florida Standards. Today we are doing an executive order that is going to instruct Commissioner Corcoran to get to work and come up with good standards for the state of Florida, which will include eliminating Common Core and the vestiges of Common Core. Look, let's just try to get this right. We want to be very high quality. We want to demand excellence, but I think we want to do that in a way that's responsive to some of the concerns that we've had over the many number of years. And so the executive order will require the commissioner to provide a roadmap so that we have authentic Florida-based standards. He's also going to tell us how we can increase the quality of our instructional curriculum. He's going to suggest innovative ways to streamline some of the testing and to make that so that it's something that is measuring success, but we're not just teaching to a test. And then something that's really, really important to me is identifying ways so that we can really make civics education a priority in Florida. But I think when people graduate from a Florida high school, and I think some of the students here, are probably, very good in this regard, but I don't think it's true statewide. You really need to understand what makes America the country it is. We're not a country where everyone has the same religious denomination, where everyone has the same ethnic heritage. What unites us, or what's supposed to, is the idea and certain principles that the country was founded on, that you see reflected in the Constitution, that have really been the focal points for a lot of the great debates we've had in the country's history. And I think it's important that when we're sending some of these students out, that they're not only prepared for a career or prepared for higher education, but they're prepared to discharge the duties of citizenship. But if we don't have folks that understand, what it means to be an American, are passionate about being citizens, that really undergirds everything else that we see, whether it's economy or all these other things. There's a requirement to make sure that our curriculum is up to snuff. And so, we're going to be, Richard's going to be looking at that and making sure that, particularly when you have things like American history, American civics, I really want to have an apolitical curriculum. I don't want this to where we're trying to smuggle in, kind of modern day partisan politics. That's not what this is about. And to the extent that's been done, where people have shown me examples of that. I don't know necessarily if it was in Florida, but they've showed me textbook examples. We obviously want to steer clear from that. And so that is going to be something that we're going to look at. And obviously we want to have input from the public on that. Yes, sir.
What concerns were you hearing from parents and voters about Common Core that led you to make this decision to move on?
I think there was a concern about, they felt that it had been imposed federally, whereas they are protective of wanting to have these decisions made locally, and that's just apart from the substance of it. But then also you would have situations where parents did not like some of the curriculum. Maybe they had trouble even doing basic math to help their kids. And my thing is like, look, if that's something that is being put in and it's not being received well by the parents, we need to have a system that's flexible enough to understand that. There were a lot of different things I think that people said, and part of it is when you go through the process the right way, even if people don't agree with everything that we end up doing, at least they'll feel like they were listened to. And I think with Common Core, a lot of people just didn't feel like anyone was listening to them. And I think that's a big problem.
Again, we want to thank Governor Ron DeSantis for taking such a courageous and bold move by repealing Common Core. He recognizes that Common Core is doing more damage than it's doing good. He recognizes that our children, Common Core is being used as a tool to disinform our children and to hinder them. And unfortunately, our children across the United States, not just in Florida, not just here in Tennessee, but throughout the country, because there were 41 states currently, right now, that have adopted Common Core. In Florida, the elected officials told the citizens of Florida last year, no, we repealed Common Core. We did away with Common Core. They didn't do away with Common Core. They renamed the Florida standards, but they kept the same program. Our children are they're not succeeding in our public schools. And Governor DeSantis recognizes the threat, and he's repealing Common Core. They're going to put in place standards that reflect Florida citizens. They're willing to listen to the citizens of the great state of Florida to determine their education in their public schools for their children, as it should be. The federal government, who pushed Common Core or dangled the carrot over the heads of all the governors across the country, promising millions of dollars if they would implement Common Core in their state. Of course, now we see the fallout that is coming from this effort. And all it did was ruin our education system. Our children are being used as guinea pigs for these efforts. We need to go back to a classical approach to education, a classical approach to education curriculum and standards. Unfortunately, we've lost at least one generation of children who have gone through the system with Common Core as the basis of their education, and it's deeply disturbing. So, in September of 2017, I traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with then Congressman DeSantis, and I gave him the evidence, the examples of the content in our textbooks. Those Pearson published textbooks were undermining not just our Judeo-Christian values, the history of our country. They're undermining our freedom, our constitutional republic, our allies, who we are strongly associated with, like Israel. They're fueling the anti-Semitism that we see increasing in not just our higher ed campuses, but even K through 12 in our secondary schools. And all because we are giving our children propaganda like what we found here in Tennessee. So I commend the citizens for being firm in pushing the state of Florida and their government to adopt education standards that reflect the values of their state. And I am encouraging the governors across the country to follow the bold and courageous lead of Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida and repeal Common Core and establish more of a classical education approach for our children. Classical education, that approach in public school education worked for our generation. And the generations that come after us, they're no different. They're children just as we were children, and the classical approach works. We need to go back to what worked and stop using our children again as guinea pigs for the next new fad that Pearson decides to send down the pike. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, these inaccurate textbooks are fueling the anti-Semitism that we see going on in our schools across the country and around the world. And of course, a lot of that is being fueled by the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. If you're not familiar with BDS, the BDS movement, again, visit our website, pjtn.org, go to the store page, order Boycott This. Share that documentary, sit down and watch it with your children, with your middle school, high school, even your college students. Sit down and watch the film and have a conversation about the film. We produced the film for the millennial generation, so we hired a comedian to make it entertaining. But we went to Israel ourselves to show the world that the narrative that is being pushed by people like Omar and Tlaib, the congresswomen now, the elected leaders in Congress, this anti-Semitic movement, BDS, that they're pushing, is based on a false narrative. There is no truth, no facts to substantiate the position that Israel is an apartheid state, that they're oppressing the Palestinian people. In fact, quite the contrary. If you talk to the Arabs on the street who live in Israel, whole different story. than what you hear from the pro-Palestinian propagandists in Washington, D.C., Tlaib and Omar, as well as many others, even Christian leaders. And this is what's so disturbing, is that we have Christians who have bought into this boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. So in order to learn more, please order the documentary. You can also watch Boycott This on Amazon Prime. So if you've got Amazon Prime, just go on, put Boycott This into the search engine with the films, and you'll get to watch it right there online. Sadly, as I said, anti-Semitism is growing among the Christians once again, being fueled by BDS. Historically, it has always been replacement theology that has fueled anti-Semitism, using New Testament scriptures to quoted out of context to incite the hatred and violence against Jews for the last 2,000 years. Anti-Semitism, ladies and gentlemen, I will say this over and over, is born out of ignorance, biblical ignorance, and Christians should know better. We should know our Bible. We should absolutely read the Bible instead of listening to groups who are going to dictate to us what the Bible says, if they even quote the Bible at all. Because many of the churches that support the whole boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, they don't base their scripture, their agreement with this anti-Semitic system or agenda through the text of scripture. They'll take scripture out of context and they'll quote that scripture, but they won't put in context. We're told in the scriptures, God told the prophet Obadiah in the last days he was going to wipe out the descendants of Edom, because they stood by while their brother Jacob was held in captivity and they did nothing. We cannot, during the most educated generation in the history of mankind, we cannot sit back and say we didn't know or that we don't know enough about it. We have all the tools at our fingertips, the internet, the computer, programming like this, to be informed and educated about this growing threat and what our biblical responsibility is in the midst of it. The purpose, of course, of our award-winning programs is to combat that biblical, spiritual ignorance and give people the biblical truths in order to share that information with their family and friends. Because, as I said, ladies and gentlemen, we will stand before Almighty God one day. One of my favorite quotes from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who is one of Christian history's incredible theologians. He ended up being murdered by the Nazis 4 days before the Allies liberated the concentration camps. But Dietrich Bonhoeffer stated, as he was watching evil prevail in Germany and in Europe, he challenged the church and he said to them, keeping silence in the face of evil is itself evil. That God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have to be educated. We have to be informed. We have to know, what does the Bible say with regards to this issue. We're going to take a quick break to show you another way that you can financially support our global mission through our media. And when we come back, we're going to continue our study with Copernicus and the Jews. Take a look. This month marks the 70th anniversary of the historic Declaration of the State of Israel. God's sovereign hand can be seen all over this land. Included in the celebrations is the opening of the American Embassy right here in Jerusalem. In honor of this celebration, PJTN is offering a special 70th anniversary package, which includes a captivating new book and an award-winning DVD. Israel Rising is a unique visual story of Israel's miraculous journey from unforgiving desert to thriving nation. Thousands of years ago, the prophet Ezekiel foretold a future time in which the arid land of Israel would come alive for its people. Now this breathtaking book documents the fulfillment of this vision, as rarely seen photographs from the 1880s to the 1940s are juxtaposed with recent photos of the same locations. This book will inspire and captivate you as it illuminates Israel's foretold awakening in a new and unforgettable way. In addition, you'll receive the award-winning documentary, Israel Indivisible, The Case for the Ancient Homeland. This inspiring film examines the many political twists and turns that make Israel the world's most controversial nation. From Abraham and the Promise to the issues facing the Jewish state today, the film examines the historical, archaeological, legal, and biblical foundations for the modern state of Israel. This is a limited time offer for these two remarkable resources for just a one-time gift of $70 today. Your generous donation will help ensure that PJTN stays on the front lines and in the headlines of all the important issues facing Israel and our Jewish brethren. So please go to pjtn.org today. Welcome back. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue our Bible study based on the book Copernicus and the Jews by Daniel Gruber. This week, we're going to continue that study in chapter 1. So for those of you who ordered a copy of Copernicus and the Jews last week, if you'll turn to page 8, and we're going to pick up there down toward the bottom of the page. If you are interested in ordering this book so you can be a part of this Bible study every week, I strongly encourage you to order a copy at our website, pjtn.org. Go to the store page and you can order your copy and join us in this Bible study each week. The study is going to show us the miscalculations within Christianity that has ignored the covenant that God made with Israel. It's why replacement theology is running rampant in our churches today, and why church pastors are teaching that God has replaced Israel with the church, which is based on a false notion. Just as the church back during the time of Copernicus believed that the universe rotated around the earth, Copernicus was teaching that no, the universe rotates around the sun, that the sun was the central part of the universe. And of course, he defied the political and religious leaders with this teaching. And if you missed last week's program, I want to encourage you, go to pjtn.org or PJTN TV on YouTube, and you can catch last week's program as well, where we started and then pick up. We're going to begin this study a little bit about Nicholas Copernicus. If you're not familiar, you don't remember him from school. He was a Polish astronomer who revolutionized planetary astronomy and who laid the foundations of modern developments and technology. He was born in 1473 and died in 1543 at the age of 70. He was elected as a canon of Frauenburg, acting as representative of the cathedral chapter. He was knowledgeable in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and theology. Last week, we discussed that in the time of Copernicus, it was believed that the heavens revolved around the earth. Scientists, mathematicians, and philosophers affirmed it, and the church did too. However, the planets didn't orbit the earth and moved in defiance of the science of the day, the theology that endorsed it, and the common sense that upheld it. The mathematicians had no factual justification for their mathematical constructions, but they were willing to preserve the illusion that there was no anomaly. The mathematical solutions preserved the false cosmology, hindering people from discovering truth. And ladies and gentlemen, we're really in a very similar situation when it comes to Israel in these last days and God's plan for Israel and the church. The church was grafted into the Commonwealth of Israel, and of course we become part of Israel. We do not replace Israel, and we do not replace our Jewish brethren. So if you will join me by opening up to chapter 1, page 8, and we will begin our study. Okay, so we're on page 8, and we are at the last paragraph. So if you have your books, if you'll follow along with me, it continues to say, the ancients had wisdom, but there was an unsolved problem in their cosmology. Those who followed the ancients stayed within that traditional cosmology, but adjusted and modified some aspects of it. They modernized it. These changes made the system more accurate, but they never confronted the real problem. The system, the cosmology, the conceptual scheme with the earth at the center, the ancient tradition itself was wrong, irremediably wrong. No modification or adjustment could change that. In any age, in any field, whether astronomy, medicine, history, theology, literature, business, or sports, very few people ever see their discipline itself, their system, differently than their peers do. Some see the principles or facts better. Some understand them better and can operate more effectively, but they do not question the system and its categories. They cannot get outside of the system. Most experts and authorities uphold the prevailing view precisely because they are experts. That is, they are knowledgeable in what has already been thought and what has already been done. They are authorities because they are recognized by others in their field who hold the same view, but cannot discern, express, and demonstrate it as well. They are experts in their field. They do not see their field from the outside. Copernicus was respectful of the ancient tradition, but not enchanted by its acquired mathematical magic. He was interested instead in finding the real explanation of how the heavens and the earth related. How are the complex and variable planetary motions to be reduced to a simple and recurrent order? Why do the planets retrogress? And how account for the irregular rate of even their normal motions? He did not use his science and math to buttress the ancient tradition. He used it to search and examine the evidence. He used it to try to find the answers to questions that others were no longer asking. Copernicus began to reinterpret the data in the hope of finding a consistent, coherent explanation. Strong opposition came from those who were unwilling to forsake the failed cosmology. The strongest opposition came from the theologians and church hierarchy. De Revolutionibus was published in 1543, dedicated to the Pope. Copernicus himself was the nephew of a bishop and a canon of the Cathedral of Frauenburg, yet in 1616, the church banned all books advocating the reality of the earth's motion. The institution, which claimed to uphold God's order in the earth set itself in direct opposition to the reality of God's order throughout the universe. Nevertheless, the evidence in support of the theory of Copernicus began to accumulate. Better scientific tables were calculated. Kepler presented a well-argued, consistent version of the new cosmology. Galileo's telescope opened up the heavens, showing things that were inconsistent with the old cosmology, but predicted by the new. Newton discovered gravity and the universal laws of motion. The ancient tradition of interpretation was wrong. What everyone observed and knew was wrong. The entire universe functioned differently than the way the most knowledgeable and esteemed experts had taught. It had always functioned differently, but the experts, by the knowledge and esteem that they commanded, had been able to cover over that fact. The history of science, like the history of many human endeavors, is filled with orthodoxy and heresy, and false doctrines, true and false doctrines, the persecuted and the persecutors, defenders of the traditions and innovators. This is observable and verifiable. It is the way the world functions. As Galileo wrote to Kepler, quote, "I have for many years been a partisan of the Copernican view because it reveals to me the causes of many natural phenomena that are entirely incomprehensible in the light of the generally accepted hypotheses. To refute the latter, I have collected many proofs, but I do not publish them because I am deterred by the fate of our teacher Copernicus, who, although he had won immortal fame with a few, was ridiculed and condemned countless people, for very great is the number of the stupid." unquote. Many fought against it, but the changing cosmology led to some very tangible changes of life on Earth. Copernicus led to Newton. Newton led to Einstein. Today's technological society has come from the change in how the universe was perceived after Copernicus. The change in cosmology brought changes greater than anyone could have imagined. The changes were not limited to technology. As Goethe explained, of all the discoveries and opinions, none may have exerted a greater effect on the human spirit than the doctrine of Copernicus. No wonder his contemporaries did not wish to let all this go and offered every possible resistance to a doctrine which in its converts authorized and demanded a freedom of view and greatness of thought so far unknown, indeed not even dreamed of. Very interesting, but what about Copernicus and the Jews? Good question. Be patient just a little longer. After all, this will be an examination of the errors of the received wisdom of many centuries. That cannot be done by assertions and opinions. It can only be accomplished step by step by presenting more accurate data, more consistent analysis, and an interpretive cosmology that both explains and predicts the evidence rather than contradicting it. The Copernican revolution began with a willingness to face the anomaly of planetary motion, an anomaly that was inconsistent with an Earth-centered universe. An anomaly is something whose existence is recognizable but inexplicable within the prevailing system. An anomaly presents a challenge that cannot be reconciled without departing from the system. The planets derive their name from a Greek word meaning wanderers. They were named planets because they were celestial wandering ones. To those whose minds are filled with the ancient tradition, the planets gave the appearance of wandering. Actually, the planets did not wander at all. They were simply governed by something more than what the keepers of the ancient tradition assumed to govern the rest of the universe. As it turned out, the rest of the universe, who was governed differently than what everyone assumed, an accurate cosmology could only be formulated by rejecting the underlying assumption and the system built upon it. So when it comes to life on Earth, there is a people who have also been labeled wanderers. In the Septuagint, which is the oldest Greek translation we have of the Hebrew Scriptures, we're told that until the time of restoration, the children of Israel will be planetai and tois ethnesin, i.e., wanderers among the nations, or the Gentiles. And ladies and gentlemen, that is going to conclude our study for this week. We are going to pick back up next Wednesday on page 11 of chapter 1, and we will continue. But I hope you found the information that I just shared with you interesting to see how the people, the leaders, whether theologians, mathematicians, astronomers who were esteemed and they were part of the hierarchy, did not want to see things. They didn't want to look outside of the situation. They just continued to further an understanding of the cosmos that was accepted by the majority instead of questioning and challenging and looking from the outside in to what they believed. So we're going to continue this study as we leave it with how the planets also being called wanderers. And of course, we know that the Jews have been called wanderers as well. And you know, we also know that the whole story of God's plan of creation is actually written in the heavenlies. And so we're going to continue next week to learn more about this. But right now, we're going to take another short break. And when we come back, we're going to close with our program and my comments. From studying history, it's very clear that what starts with the Jews never ends only with the Jews. we must strongly stand against any anti-Semitic trends. For if not stopped, they'll cause harm to all of us, and we'll witness the downfall of our Judeo-Christian Western culture. Today, many people say there's no longer a need for a Jewish state, that Jews around the world no longer need a place of refuge. But anyone who has heard recent statistics about the worldwide rise in anti-Semitism would never make such a claim. The reality is that neo-Nazi groups and Nazi sympathizers are increasing around the world. Surveys show that over 1 billion people in the world harbor anti-Semitic attitudes. Close to 50% believe that Jews have too much power in the business world, and 2/3 of the world's population has never heard of the Holocaust or believe the historic accounts of it are inaccurate. If there's one thing history has taught the Jewish people, a place they can go in time of need is essential, and Israel fulfills that role. But the need for a Jewish state is not limited to being only a refuge for Jews. Jewish tradition in Israel grants full rights for women and people of all races, faiths, and gender. This tradition is what often makes Israel among the first countries to send doctors and field hospitals to any place where a natural disaster occurs, utilizing their medical advances to save lives worldwide. Muslims, Christians, and people of every faith, or those of no faith, have the freedom to worship or not worship as they choose. For Muslims, the Jewish state goes out of its way to provide this freedom. For example, every Israeli university gives students the option of deferring their exams during the month of Ramadan. The Knesset calls off all sessions at sunset during Ramadan to ensure that Muslim Knesset members can break their fasts with the traditional iftar dinner. In an open and democratic manner, opportunities for education, advancement, and careers exist for all citizens in the Jewish state. Sadly, such rights and opportunities do not exist in any of the Muslim Arab states. For example, in neighboring Jordan, Jews cannot become citizens. And in Saudi Arabia, no non-Muslim can become a citizen. Saying that Israel must cease to exist as a Jewish state while accepting that other countries define themselves as Muslim is pure hypocrisy. In most of these countries, no rights exist for non-Muslims, women, and the LGBT community. Don't let yourself be manipulated by evil people with a wicked agenda. When the self-serving villains are in control, good people from all religions suffer. Muslims, Christians, and all people of conscience should stand proudly and show respect for a country that gives so much to the world in so many ways. Do your part, do your research, and do what you can to make a difference. Because what happens in Israel does affect us all. This is not just a Jewish or just an Israeli problem. This is a problem for all humanity, for each and every one of us who believe in freedom and human rights. Learn more about what you can do at pjtn.org. That's our program for this evening. I hope you found our study enlightening and inspiring. And I want to just remind you to please share this program with your Facebook family and friends. And of course, we're going to continue our study next Wednesday night, and we'll continue through the Copernican story. I want to just remind you, if you're new to this program and you haven't ordered a copy of the Copernicus and the Jews book by Daniel Gruber, you can go to our website, pjtn.org, go to the store page, order your copy, and join us every Wednesday night as we work through this Bible study. Reading this book has been enlightening and has revolutionized my way of seeing the Bible and God's covenant with Israel and the Jewish people. And it further reinforces why it's so important that we stand with our Jewish brethren at this critical hour against the rise of anti-Semitism. So I also want to encourage you, again, if you didn't see the program last week, you can go back to PJTN TV on YouTube. You can actually watch that program and all of our programs. We've got a bunch of clips there. Please subscribe to that PJTN TV YouTube page. And of course, share the videos with your family and friends as well. Post them on other social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We've got long clips, we've got short clips, so we've got something for everybody. As always, if you have any questions or comments, you can post them right now on Facebook, or you can email me at comments@pjtn.org. And if you want to learn more, as I said, you can tune into our PJTN TV page on YouTube, or you can tune into our Daystar programming every week, Saturday night at 6:30 Eastern Time, and Sunday evening at midnight Eastern Time. And of course, you'll get to watch that program, and that's, of course, one of our top award-winning Focus on Israel shows. It's a 30-minute program that comes on weekly, and that's the one that broadcasts it to 2.6 billion viewers each week. So please tune in. You can also visit our events page on the website to learn about upcoming events where I will be speaking. I'll be in Ohio next week, so I hope to see some of you there. If you want to arrange a speaking event for me to come and speak to your congregation, I would love to do that. Your university, your school, civics group, you can contact us again at comments@pjtn.org. In closing, please continue to keep Israel and the Jewish community in your prayers as we watch this incredible rise of anti-Semitism, and pray for our government leaders that we get a handle on these anti-Semites that are now coming into our federal government, into Congress. It's a disturbing time to witness here in the United States of America. I never thought that I would see this day. But I also want to remind you, please send us your prayer requests. As you're praying for our Jewish brethren, we want to pray for you, whether you have a need for a healing or a relational issue. Whatever it is, we want to hear from you, and we want to keep you in our prayers as well. Of course, you can like us on Facebook. You're here right now. Or you can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. And again, subscribe to the PJTN TV on YouTube. So I want to thank you for joining us again this evening. And I just pray God's blessings upon you. God told Abraham in Genesis 12:3, I will bless those who bless you, and he who ignores you, I will utterly destroy. So it's an encouragement and an inspiration to me to see so many people who love the Lord, who also feel the same way about Israel and the Jewish people at this critical hour. It is for such a time as this. And we at PJTN Online will see you next week. God bless you.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, P.O. Box 682711, Franklin, Tennessee 37068. You can also support PJTN online. Visit pjtn.org or call 1-877-873-9020.
Anti-Semitism has reached epic proportions, and Israel is now surrounded by nations who seek its destruction. For Israel to lose just one battle would mean losing everything. As Christians, it is our biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and Israel. PJTN needs your help to reach more Christians with this urgent message. Please visit our website to become a member today and order our award-winning documentaries. You must decide that you won't be silent. Sign up now at pjtn.org. God bless you, and thank you for your support and prayers.